So at 25 years old, I was working in a climbing gym. I was a gym rat. I was obsessed with rock climbing, and I tried to craft my entire life around this endeavor. And so I got a job working at the front counter of the local climbing gym. Actually, it wasn't super local. It was like 12 miles away, and I didn't have a car at the time because I was working as a climbing gym person. And so I would rollerblade there. Different story for a different day. But as I was working there, I graduated from working the front desk to coaching because I became a fairly accomplished climber. And then people are like, oh, well, you coach our kids. And so I became the coach of the kids team. And this was a really interesting thing because I'd never thought of myself as a teacher. I didn't think of myself as somebody that was good at working with children, but it was quite enjoyable. I loved it, in fact. And I got to work with a broad swath of kids all across the ability spectrum. You know, you have some kids who are just coming in from day one. They've never touched a rock. They've never climbed a foot off the ground, but they're excited, and then they're terrified, and you have to deal with that. And then on the other side, you know, we had kids who would go on to become Olympians, right? And so that's a pretty big the spectrum of capacity there. And one of the most valuable lessons I ever learned, I'm going to share with you guys today. And this is a lesson that doesn't just apply to coaching kids. It applies to everything when it comes to coaching yourself, when it comes to coaching your team, when it comes to coaching anybody as you're trying to teach them how to be better versions of themselves, right? So we had this kid, the way this came up was we had this kid, she was very, very talented, but she would really get inside of her head when she was on the side of a wall. You know, you're 25, 30 feet off the ground. It's a very scary, very exposed feeling. You feel very vulnerable, and it's a natural human fear to be afraid of falling, right? And so what would happen is she was a fantastic climber, like one of the best in the world in the first, 20 feet of climbing. Like nobody could touch her, right? But then she would hit this wall where her internal reptilian mind would shut off or would turn on, and the rest of her brain would shut off, and she couldn't push past. And I remember working with her, and one of the things that came out of this is that when somebody is on the wall and you're trying to coach them, you're trying to get through to their brains, and their brains are just shut off. You run into this interesting thing of like, I can't actually help you because you can't hear me, right? But one of the things that I'd notice is that our tendency when we're yelling at people on the side of the wall is we tell them what not to do. We focus on the negative. And this gave birth to a concept that we called don't coach the negative. Because the way this would manifest in that instance with her on the side of the wall is we would yell, don't be afraid, go for it. Don't be afraid, go for it. And the problem with coaching the negative is that you're telling somebody what not to do, but you're not really giving them any clarity about what they can do or what they should do. And so if you were to extrapolate this out to, you have somebody on your team, they edited a video, they come back and you're like, that video is not very good. And you point out, here's what, don't do this, this, and this, and this, and this. Okay. Well, that's a checklist of things not to do. But that's not going to get you towards where you want to be, because now they're just not going to do those things. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to do the reverse of those things. And so instead of telling her, don't be afraid, we started coaching the positive. And this became very powerful when working with kids because we started getting quick results with kids because they would respond to this. Kids are great as little petri dishes to see what works and what doesn't. And the coaching the negative almost never worked. Like, don't put your foot there. Don't put your foot behind the rope because if you fall, you're going to get flipped upside down. We tell the kids that all the time, and they still put their foot there, right? And once we started coaching the positive, and instead of telling them what not to do, we started telling them, do this. Now they just had to execute what we told them to do, right? Oh, don't put your foot there. Instead, put your foot here. And we'd leave off that first part, right? So we'd coach the positive. And the way this manifested for that little girl on the side of that wall was, what's the opposite of fear? If you're coaching somebody in that moment and you don't want to coach them on don't be afraid, the negative, what's the positive? Well, the positive of fear is courage. So instead of yelling at her, don't be afraid, we would yell at her, be brave. And now that gave her something to step into. It gave her an identity that I'm a brave person. I'm capable of doing brave things. Not, I'm afraid, and they're telling me to not be afraid. That therefore means right now I am afraid, right? That's already putting a negative identity onto the situation. So in that situation, we would start to yell, be brave, go for it. You got this. Be brave, believe in yourself. And instead of making it about the negative. Now, this is really important because our default when it comes to coaching and training people on our teams is to focus on the mistake. Here's what you did wrong. Don't do that, right? It's like with a dog. But if you do not give them the positive, if you do not focus on the reinforcement of the behavior that you want them to do, then you just leave them feeling like, well, I fucked up. I'm not supposed to do this, but I don't really know what else to do. And they might not have the words for that, right? The problem is they might even know what the positive thing is that they're supposed to do, right? Like, oh, well, you told me don't use that font. I know that means use this font. But next time they're going to do the edit, their mind doesn't initially jump to use that font. Their mind just goes to, oh, I'm not supposed to use that font. What am I going to do? Or maybe it just leads them to like this murky, ambiguous place. So you always just want to make it as easy as possible for people to jump to the right answer by just reinforcing, here's what to do. Here's what it looks like to do it right. Here's the identity I want you to live up to. Not here's all the things that you're doing, right? That are wrong and I want you to stop. So I found that to be incredibly powerful. It's a tool that I've used. I still have to catch myself, obviously. We fall into this pattern of coaching the negative all the time, and you'll probably see it in yourself. But instead of coaching that negative, just focus on the positive, the thing that you want them to step into, and you will start to see better results. And that's a great thing. So that's all I got for you. Be a better teacher. I'll see you in the next episode.